Today's daf going to be learning a Sanhedrin daf Yutet. Today's daf is sponsored by Judy Farber in loving memory of Yuval Mor Yosef and Yossi Cohen, who were killed in a terror attack, December 13th, 2018. Today's the Hebrew Yurtzeit, He B'Tevet, at Givat Asaf, and their 6th Yurtzeit, and for the continued refuah shlema of her son, Netanel Ilan ben Tzipori, who was critically injured in the attack. Today's daf is sponsored by Amy Kahan and Rabbi Joshua Waxman in loving memory of Alex Kahan, Eliyahu ben Shlomo Cohen Ve'Eliza on his 1st Yurtzeit. May his gentleness and wisdom continue to guide us all. Today's daf is sponsored by Elaine Hochberg in honor of her husband Ari, who continues to learn with her each day on the 5th anniversary of starting Daf Yomi. And good time to mention that, yes, it's the 5th anniversary on the English date, Hebrew date a few days later this week, of starting this cycle of Daf Yomi. So Mazal tov to everyone who's made it this far. It means we have about 2.5 years left, so even a little bit less. So looking forward to celebrating with you all at the end. And for those who joined in the middle, it's all good too. You should be proud always of your accomplishments. Okay, we're going to get started with, and also Gila Fine's class is starting tonight on Agadah. So if you haven't, or today by you, wherever time it is, if you haven't registered, you can register. You have to pre-register for the course. And yeah, and looking forward to seeing you there. Choletz v'choltzin. So now we're starting at the bottom of Yud Chet Amud Bet. We're still on the kohen gadol, and then we're going to move on to the king. So the kohen gadol, we said choletz v'choltzin lishto. He can do chalitza. His wife can be nichlatz if she needs, instead of yibum, right? They do chalitza to her. So now it says kapasik v'tane, lo shnamina erusin, v'lo shnamina nisuin. Now what this means though is he can't do yibum, okay? No yibum. Now the question is, why can't the kohen gadol do yibum? Now, say he can't do yibum because the kohen gadol is not allowed to marry a widow, right? And there's two things for the kohen gadol. One is a pasuk saying that the kohen gadol has to marry a widow, and the second, can't marry a widow. And the second is the kohen has to marry a virgin. Okay, so now the question is, why maybe the mitzvah of yibum could potentially override that? And the Gemara says, well, kapasik v'tane lo shnaman erusin lo shnaman nisuin. Now, we can't do yibum whether, it didn't say whether she was already married or whether she was betrothed. Either which way, it sounds like you can't do yibum if the brother wasn't fully married to the wife, but was just betrothed, even though they hadn't had relations yet. Now that would mean the woman is still a betula, still a virgin. So bishlamam and nisuin. From nisuin, I get why he can't do yibum, because have ase v'lo ta'aseh ve'enase doche lo ta'aseh ve'ase. There's certain principles in the Gemara, in the how to darshan the Torah. One is that you can have an aseh, a mitzvah aseh, a positive commandment, override a negative commandment. But you cannot have a positive commandment override a negative and a positive commandment. That's too strong. And therefore, the mitzvah of yibum is a positive commandment. The mitzvah of the kohen gadol to marry a virgin is a positive commandment. The mitzvah not to marry a widow is a negative commandment. So you can't have the positive commandment of yibum and override both of those. But but if she's only betrothed, I don't get it. There's only, you get rid of then, he has to marry a virgin. That's not a problem. He's not marrying a virgin. She was only betrothed. So theoretically, you have a mitzvah aseh of yibum, and it should override the mitzvah lo taseh of don't marry a widow. To which they answer, the reason is that if we would allow this, which theoretically it is allowed, but what? It would only be allowed for the first time he has relations with her to fulfill the mitzvah of yibum. We would not allow it for him to stay married to her. Okay? Now, this is a little different and it's a little confusing because you might remember the whole mitzvah of yibum is an aseh, this docheh lo taseh, because the mitzvah of yibum is to marry your brother's widow, and you're actually forbidden to marry your brother's widow. It's one of the arayot. Excuse me. So, it's very strange, right? Normally, you would say, okay, well, now there's a special drasha for yibum. First of all, the whole mitzvah of yibum overrides the arayot of marrying your brother's wife. Okay, I just want to point out, because we're actually going to get to this later today. When the two brothers marry the same woman, that's always forbidden unless there's yibum. Always forbidden, even if one brother dies. Okay, the other brother can't marry the brother's widow. When it comes to sisters, a man can marry a woman's sister. He can marry a woman and then marry her sister after her death. Okay, it's, for whatever reason, that's what the Torah says. We're going to get back to the sisters later. But right now we're on the mitzvah of yibum. Yibum generally overrides. It's an aseh that overrides a lo taseh. And then because there's a pasuk, it says then isha, they learn that in yibum, even though really it should only override the first time, but she then becomes his wife for all intents and purposes. And therefore, that aseh overrides the lo taseh completely, even for down the road. But that's only because there's a special drasha there by yibum. But here, we're going to say, in the case of the kohen gadol, the yibum will only be able to override the widow issue temporarily, not only for the first time they have relations, which is the mitzvah of yibum is really to have relations so that you can be lahakim shem ameh, to keep the name going. But definitely after that, he'd have to divorce her. So if, right, which by the way would be a strange situation, kind of like a one night stand type of thing. It would be a little bit strange to do that. I mean, he would do it through the proper means, but it would be weird to then divorce her immediately, knowing going into it. But putting that aside, the Gemara basically says it's a gzera bi'arishona atu bi'ashniya. We don't want to allow them, we're not going to override the mitzvah, right? The forbidden, that lo taseh of the widow for that one bi'ah, to do the mitzvah of yibum, because we're worried that he might stay married to her. And we don't want that to happen because that really is forbidden. Because again, in this case, different from regular yibum, which overrides the arayot, this wouldn't override it fully. It would only override it temporarily for that one time. And then we're worried they might stay married. And that's why we're going to forbid yibum across the board. Tanya Nami Hachi, here's a brighter to support this. Im kadmu ba'alo, but bi'ah rishona kanu. If he does have relations with her that first time, it's actually effective. But he would have to immediately divorce her. So a kohen gadol shouldn't do this, but if the kohen gadol does it, it's actually not really a problem because the aseh is dochet, the lo taseh. It's just we want to avoid the bi'ashniya, and that's why you shouldn't do it. Mate lo mate. Now we're going to go to this machloket in the Mishnah between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about if the kohen, I think it's Rabbi Meir, right? If the kohen gadol dies, if the kohen gadol, sorry, has a relative who dies, right? So Rabbi Meir says, what do we do? The kohen can't leave the city, but he can escort the body, if you remember, right? He reveals, right? He's hidden, they're revealed. They're hidden, he's revealed. Okay, so now we're going to have, and Rabbi Yehuda says, no, not at all. Mina mikdash lo yitzeh. So Tana Rabbananu, mina mikdash lo yitzeh. So how does Rabbi Meir understand that? So this Braita is going to explain. Lo yitzeh imahen. He can't leave the temple and go with everybody else. And let's say they really mean is to escort. So he can't escort with everybody else, but he can go behind them. Ketzad, exactly as we saw in the Mishnah, right? When he can't see them, then he can be seen. When they're seen, he can't be seen. So, right, like you use corners and buildings and things like that. Right? But then he can only go to the gate of the city because at that point, there's no way for him not to be seen. And now we're going to talk about why this whole seeing, not seeing. And then Rabbi Yehuda says, Eino yotzei min mikdash, because it says, Umina mikdash lo yotzei. Shapir kama Rabbi Yehuda. So they say Rabbi Yehuda's got a very valid point. How can Rabbi Meir explain himself in light of the pasuk, which says very clearly, don't leave the mikdash? Amar lecha Rabbi Meir, he has a good retort. Ihachi, or he could retort, this isn't him speaking. Amar lecha is always someone putting words in his mouth, as if Rabbi Meir was here, he would say, well, then he can't go to his house. If it says don't leave the temple and you take that literally, he can never go home, which obviously he can go home. Elahachi kamar. What it really means, according to Rabbi Meir, is mina mikdash lo yitzeh, mikdushato lo yitzeh. Mikdash doesn't mean temple. Mikdash means his status of sanctity, which means he cannot become impure. So, therefore, now we're going to get to this hidden, revealed, all that. What does that help you? Well, he's not going to get close to the body because he just makes sure, right? Because he's doing this whole thing, making sure he doesn't see them, they don't see him. That will enable him to remember the whole time, I can't come close to the body, and that will protect him. Rabbi Yehuda, what does he say? Why won't he allow that then? Because he's so upset, and we're going to see a bunch of things about psychology today. because he's so upset about the relative having died, we're concerned that he might actually accidentally come in contact. In other words, this hidden, revealed, like he might just put that aside and just run after the body and come in contact with it. So in order to prevent that, we say you can't escort the body at all. So those are the two approaches. And then in the end, what's interesting is nobody understands the pasuk literally, umin mikdash lo yitzeh, because nobody thinks that the kohen gadol has to live his entire life just in the temple. Kishehu menachem. Now we're at the part where when he goes and comforts others in the shura. If you remember, we talked about the shura. The shura in those days, and we're going to talk about this today and how it developed, was that the people would walk and the avelim would stand. Nowadays, we do the reverse. The avelim walk through two lines, right? There's two lines of people and the avelim walk through. In those days, it was the opposite. So now they say, Kashu over b'shua tani Rabbanit. So that's the bright that's going to explain a little better with the Mishnah didn't get into all the details. Kashu over b'shua l'nachem et ha'achirim. Skan u'mashuach sha'avar b'yamino. Okay, we're going to have these rows. Okay, we're going to start on the right and keep moving left, 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 left. Okay, till we get to a few rows. So the first row on the right, we're going to have the skan, who is what we called in the Mishnah the memuneh, which is the person who's in place in case the kohen gadol becomes impure for some reason. He will take over. There's the mashuach sha'avar. In the end of Bayit Sheni, the Second Temple period, there was a lot of change over kohen gadolim. It used to be the kohen gadol would die and then someone would take over, but they used to change it every year. People paid to be kohen gadolim. We also became very corrupt. So anyone who was a kohen gadol before then has it's like a rabbi emeritus kind of thing, and they would also be there. Okay, but you're going to see it gets a little tricky, but we'll get back to that later. So the skan and the mashuach sha'avar stand on the right. Then there's the kohen gadol. Then on his left, it's like he's got people on both sides to show the respect. Rosh Beit Av, that's the person who was in charge on that day, the head of the family that was in the temple on that day. The temple was divided into mishmarot, and each mishmar had a bunch of batei av, and each day there were 6 batei av, 6 families within the mishmar, and it was always a head of that day. So the head of that day would stand to the left of to the right of the, sorry. We started on the right, Kohen Gadol was to the left of him was the Rosh Beit Av, then the nation, Kol Ha'am, the Avelim, v'Kol Ha'am mismolo. Basically, you would have the nation, and then everyone would basically pass by the Avelim. Skan mimino. Ukeshuhu omei b'shura u'mitnachem me'acherim. Now, what about when he was the Avel? Okay, then what would happen? Skan mimino v'rosh beit av v'chol ha'am mismolo. Again, we have the skan on his right, but in this time, he's not all the way on the left. Okay, as opposed to the Avelim last time, we're all the way on the left. He's an Avel, but he's again more to the right. So we have the skan, we have him. Notice who's missing. The kohen sha'avar. We're going to get to that in a minute. Okay. So the skan and the Rosh Beit Av is on the other side, and then the rest of the nation is on more to their left, and then they'll all walk by him. So that we saw aval. But the one who is removed from his position is not going to be there. Why? My time, we're worried he's going to cause weakness to the Kohen Gadol, who's already upset that he has a relative. And he'll be even more upset. Why? Savar kachadebi. Because he'll think, and this shows all the jealousy among the Kohanim, if you remember from all the jealousy we talked about at the time when we learned Yoma, that the Kohen Gadol who lost, is no longer in power. Okay, we all know about this, right? Wants to be in power and is happy that he lost, that the Kohen Gadol, who he doesn't like because he's jealous of, lost his close relative. And that's going to make the Kohen Gadol, when he sees this previous Kohen Gadol, he'll think in his head, oh, he must be so happy that I lost my close relative, and that's going to get the Kohen Gadol even sadder. So we just kind of remove him and say, don't come at all, okay, which is really interesting. Amar Rav Papa, Shma mina mehamat nita tzlat. So Rav Papa says you can learn 3 things from this braita. Shma mina, hainu skan, hainu memuneh, that the skan and the memuneh are the same person, because in one place in the Mishnah it's called the memuneh, and in the braita it's called the skan. Shma mina avelim omdim v'chol ha'am uflim. Right, that the Avelim are the ones who stand and everyone else walks. Ushmamina Avelim l'smol ha'menachamim hemomdim. And from here you can learn that the Avelim stand on the left-hand side of everybody else. Okay, and that's how they walk through. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to have the historical braita. That's how it used to be originally. But what happened? So normally, right, the people would pass by and the Avelim would just stand there. But as we know, talk about, right? People fight all the time. This is a very big topic for today. And they were jealous of each other, and also just trying to one up the others. So you're at the scene at the cemetery, and the two families start fighting. I want to be first in line. I want to be first in line. You can imagine the pushing and the shoving and the anger. Right? This is obviously a totally inappropriate time for this to be happening. Should never happen, but certainly not at a funeral. And they made a takana that the people stand and the avelim ovrim. And that's the reason for our takana. So when you're at a funeral next, God willing, you won't be at funerals for a long time, but if you go to a funeral and you're by the shura, right, and think about this idea about what we learned from this and how to behave in a situation like this, or in general. But now we're going to have three things: Chazar, Halach, Siper, Siman. This is Siman for three takanot that Rabbi Yosi instituted. Amar Rami Bar Amma. Rami Bar Amma tells us, He brought it back to the original custom in Tzipori, meaning he went back to the Avelim walk and the Avelim stand and the people walk. Shiur Avelim omdim v'chol ha'am ovrim. Okay, and he reinstituted the first thing. Okay. Amar Rami Bar Ami. He came Rabbi Yosi b'Tzipori. Another thing. Now these two are going to be totally unconnected. A woman shouldn't walk in the shuk with her young son behind her. Okay, young child, it should really be. It doesn't matter, son, daughter. Mishuma seshaya. Because it was a terrible incident that happened. The way Rashi explains it, what happened was the woman was walking in the shuk, her son was behind him. Son got kidnapped. She didn't notice. Then she started to scream when she realized later. Someone said, "Oh, come, I'll show you where they are." Brought her to where the kidnappers were, and they raped her there. A terrible story. And unfortunately, these stories kind of hit a difficult place for us right now. And on account of that story, they said a woman should never walk in the shuk without her son being in front of her so she could see her son and protect him from someone who might try to kidnap him. Rami Bar Abba also said, Rabbi Yosi b'Tzipori shiu nashim mesaprot bebeit hakisei mishum yichud. Women should talk in the bathroom because of yichud. What does this mean? Well, bathroom here doesn't mean bathroom like we have bathrooms, and certainly not ones with locks on them, but bathroom means an outhouse, a place where they would go out in the, somewhere far out, and it would be a secluded area, and they don't want a man to walk in, and there'll be a man and woman in a secluded area, not to mention, obviously, if she's doing her thing in the bathroom, he would walk in on her while she's not fully dressed, but they wanted to avoid those situations, so they wanted people to know people were there so that the men wouldn't walk in on the women. So the women, when they're there, they should speak and just start talking, even if it's one woman alone, just, talk out loud, talk to yourself so that somebody knows you're there. Thankfully, we don't really have these situations anymore, so we're okay. Okay. Those were three takanot that Rabbi Yosi hitkin, and we got to these because the first one connected with the minhag of the shura. Now again, with this issue of the shura, and from here we'll move on. Amar Menashe Bar Ut, she'ilit et Rabbi Yoshia Rabba. I asked Rabbi Yoshia the Great, bebeit ha'almin de Hutzel. We were in the cemetery in Hutzel. What better place to learn laws of Avilut than being in the cemetery? Va'amar so I asked him about this, which obviously we don't know what he asked, but you'll see from his answer. Ein shura pchuta me'asara b'nei adam. You need a minimum of 10 people to do a shura. Ve'ein avelim min haminyan, and the avelim aren't part of those 10. So you need 10 in addition to the avelim. And he also told him, in other words, either which way you do it, whether the people stand or the avelim stand and the people walk, either which way is fine. Okay, because you see there was the original custom, they changed it, but Rabbi Yosi changed it back, so both ways of doing it are fine. One more point about the kohen gadol, and then we're going to move back to the king. So it said what the kohen is supposed to say when what people are supposed to say to him, and then what he's supposed to say to them when he is in mourning. But it didn't say in the Mishnah what he's supposed to them when they're mourning. When the kohen gadol comes to pay a shiva call, what is he supposed to say? When he's menachem others, and possibly they're also talking about in the shura itself, not necessarily there, but when he is menachem others, what does he say to them? Tashma, well, let's learn from here. It says in a Braita, V'hu omer titnachamu. It says, and the kohen gadol says, titnachamu. You should be comforted. So now it doesn't say if he says to the people who said to him when they come to his shiva, or whether he says to them. So we don't really know. But the Gemara says, hey chidami, what could be possibly the case? If it's that other people came to him and then he should say to them, titnachamu, amar le lehu iu titnachamu, nachsha karami lehu. What is he trying to put bad things upon them, bring an ayin hara on them? Like if you come to a shiva call and the person says to you, you should be consoled, sounds like something's going to happen to you and you yourself are going to be in this situation and you're going to have to be consoled. So it can't possibly be that. So it must be he was telling other people. Melech Lodan. So now we get to the Melech. According to the Mishnah, it seems very simple. A king cannot rule and can't be ruled, right? He can't be a judge and he can't be judged. And he can't testify and he can't be testified against. Well, it comes from Yosef, third generation Amora in Babylonia, and says, by the way, Rabbi Yosef, Lo shanu ela malchei Yisrael, ela malchei Beit David, dam v'danim otan. This is only kings that are not part of the Davidic dynasty. Like, for example, right, Malchut Yisrael, we know, Yerovam ben Nevad, and from there on, all those kings, and the Malchut Beit Cheshmonaim, which were closer to their time, right? All the husband and, right, we just celebrated Hanukkah. They were also kings. So just them. But Malchei Beit David, of course, dam v'danim otam dechtiv. Beit David kamar Hashem dinu laboker mishpat. It says in your Yirmiyahu that Beit David are supposed to be judges. They're supposed to rule, right? Mishpat Shlomo, for example. You can listen to Shiur and Chabutal this week. It's going to go up today. Daf Mishalahen, all about this topic of, this is also, they also said this, and it's obvious that, connecting to politics a little bit without getting too political, but, can you put someone on trial who is a head of a country? Okay, we're going to get to a story and you're going to see the dangers involved, and you can read the news to see the dangers involved in this kind of thing. So very, very clearly obvious. Okay, so now we're going to see this is not true for Beit David. They can be judges and they can be judged. So now they say, right, and now just because they judge, how do we know that means they could be judged, right? The fact that they can be judges, how does that mean that they can judge? Well, we learned this already. If you can't judge them, then they can't be judges. Because haktiv it kosheshu vakoshu. Right? If you can be a judge, you can only be a judge if you yourself experience what it is or can understand what it is to be judge. You can potentially be judge. You don't actually have had to be on trial, but you have to understand it. Like he says from this pasuk, first adorn yourself, then you could adorn others, right? First understand what it's like to be judged, and then you can judge others. Ela Malchei Yisrael my time alone. So now why not Malchei Yisrael? And here's where we really, can understand from a political perspective what was going on here. Mishum Maaseh Shaya. We again have a Maaseh Shaya, right? All these situations that led to, right? Today is a big day of the following situation led to the certain change in the law. So it wasn't originally like this. You really could have judged the king, but this story happened and they decided to change it. So what happened? The Avde de Yanai Malka, the slave of Yanai the king, Karma Nafshe, killed somebody. Amarlu Shima ben Shatach lechachamim. Shima ben Shatach, okay, he was the brother-in-law of Yanai Melech. We saw some stories about them before. There was a famous story in Brachot. See some stories otherwise. Yanai was not the greatest king. Shimon's sister, Shlomtzion, the queen, was married to Yanai Melech. And what happens is, Shimon says to the Chachamim, Tshnu enechem bo unidunenu. Bring him in and we'll judge him. Shalchulei avdach katal nafsha. So they sent to Yanai Melech and said, your slave killed someone. Shadre lehu. So they sent for him. They sent back. Shalchulei ta'an nami lahacha. They said back to Yanai Melech, you have to come in to be judged for your slave. It's a little strange, right? Yanai Melech didn't do anything. His slave killed someone. Well, they said, okay, it says in the Torah that when a shore, someone's ox gores and kills somebody, so we testify against the shore in the presence of the owners. Amrat Torah yavo ba'al hashor v'yamar al shoro. Right? The owner has to come and stand up for what his shore did. You're responsible for your property. Well, slave, right, for your possessions, like your animals. And slaves, right, these are Canaanite slaves, are also considered your possessions. So Yanai Amelech, Shimon ben Shatach says, you have to come. This is yours. Atabi comes. Amar le Shimon ben Shatach, Yanai Amelech, Amona Raglecha v'yidu b'cha. Okay, by the way, this is the same Amora Raglecha that Rabbi Yeshua becomes humiliated by Rabban Gamliel. Same idea. Stand on your feet and they will testify against you. Below the fanenu ataumed, and don't think you're standing before us, and this is me doing this to you, but ela lefnei mishamar vayao olam ataumed. You're standing before God. How do we know this? Shneemal v'amdu shnei anashim asher lehem ariv. They don't quote you the important part of the pasuk. Lifnei Hashem. Okay, the two people who have the argument stand before God. It then says also lifnei hakohanim v'ashoftim asher yu b'yim imehem. But basically, God's presence here. You have to appear before God for what happened. Amarlo. So comes in Ahimelech and says, listen, I'm not going to listen to you. Let's see what your friends have to say. The other judges, let them speak. Right? I'm not going to let you, one person, bully me into this. Let's see what everybody else says. Turning now to Amabed. Nifneh liyamino, so Shimon turns to his right. Kavshu pneihem b'karka. All the judges, like bury their heads. Nifneh l'smolo, kavshu pneihem b'karka. Right? They were obviously, number one, embarrassed from right? They weren't willing to say, go against Yanai Melech, right? You're not going to go against the king. Shimon ben Shatach obviously had he could do it because he was his brother-in-law, but the other judges weren't willing to do it. And not only that, though, why'd they hide their faces? Because they were embarrassed for Shimon ben Shatach, like they knew he was right. Amar lem Shimon ben Shatach, ba'alei machshavot atem yavo ba'al machshavot v'yipara mikem. Well, Shimon ben Shatach is usually embarrassed, and he gets very angry at them, and he says, you're ba'al machshavot. You guys have thoughts, and you're not speaking your thoughts. I know you want to judge Yanai Melech, and you're just not willing to, right? As we see the dangers in trying to put someone on trial, not everybody's willing to testify against, not everyone's willing, right? And the Melech, the king, can use his power to manipulate things also, as you see. And he says to them, Yavo Baal Machshavot, the real Baal Machshavot, which is the one who knows what your thoughts are, which is God, V'yipara mikem, and will exact justice upon you. Miyah ba Gavriel v'chavatam b'karka v'metu. Immediately Gavriel comes, it's the angel Gabriel, and smites them and kills them. And all those judges died right then and there. Botasha Amru, they saw all the dangers involved in this kind of thing. And again, you could go in lots of directions as to, what went wrong in the story. And Amru Melech lo dam v'lo danim oto lo mi'i v'lo mi'idin oto. And they said, we're removing the king from this whole court system. Okay, can't be at all. Okay, now, I just want to point out, and you'll have to listen to Achim Shalahan to hear, but the Yerushalmi has a whole different reason as to why it doesn't bring the story at all. It brings a different reason as to why the king lo dam v'lo danim. So you can listen to Achim Shalahan later today when it comes up. And yeah, that's the end of this section. Now we're going to get to lo choletz v'lo chotzin. The king can't do chalitza. The kohen gadol was allowed to do chalitza. The king can't do chalitza, and lo chotzin lishto. We don't do chalitza for his wife. However, if you remember, Rabbi Yehuda said that if he wants to do chalitza or yibum, right, he doesn't have the problem of marrying a widow or anything. If he wants to, zachor latov. Rabbi Yehuda thought it's actually good. So the Gemara is going to have a problem with that. Ini, is that really true? V'hama Rav Ashi, afilu l'man da'amar nasi shemachala kvodo machul, melech shemachala kvodo ein kvodo machul. A king is not allowed to relinquish his respect, his position and all, and say, oh yeah, it's okay. I can do something that's maybe underneath my dignity. Okay, he's not allowed to do that. A nasi can do it, but not a king. Shenema, how do we know this? Som tasim alech hamelech. And the commandment to set up kings, it says you should place upon you a king. And the drasha is that the fear of the king should be upon you. And therefore, how can the king say, I'll do this mitzvah of yibum, even though it's beneath my dignity? Well, mitzvah shani, they say for the purposes of a mitzvah, it's doable. Okay, for the purposes of a mitzvah, you can do that, and therefore it's allowed. Ve'ein nosim. By the way, I forgot to mention, I think that Yanai Melech was a Cheshmonai king. Okay, I mentioned earlier, we're going to get to that, but he was a Cheshmonai king. He was the great-grandson of Matityahu from the Hanukkah story. He was the son of Shimon, the grandson of Shimon. Okay, Yonatan Horkanus was his father. Shimon was the father of him. And just so you Just to put that in perspective in terms of the kings, these were Hasmonean kings. Okay. Ve'ein nosim. Now we're going to get off on a total tangent. It said in the Mishnah that they can't marry, right? That no one can marry the widow of the king. Ein nosin amanuta. Once the king dies, no one can marry his widow. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, say hamelech amanuto shel she can marry another king. How do we know that? Shekematzinu b'David. I'm back in the Mishnah. Shenasal amanuto shel Shaul, because it says, I will give you at Beit Adonecha. I will give you the house of your Adon, meaning Shaul. You'll become king. Ve'nishei Adonecha b'chekecha. And I will give you his wives. Okay, that's the simple reading of that pasuk. So Tanya, in a Braita, it says, Amrulo the Rabbi Yehuda, Nashim ha'reuyot lo mi Beit HaMelech. It doesn't mean he's going to get the wives of Shaul. And in fact, if he doesn't marry the wives of Shaul, the widows, but what does it mean? Umay ninhu merav umichal. He says, it's women. I'll go back to Nashim ha'reuyot lo mi Beit HaMelech. Women that are worthy of him from the king's household, not wives of the king, but women as wives who are worthy of him, like the king's wives, from the king's home, which is his two daughters, Meirav and Michal. From now, we're going to get into a very confusing section in Sefer Shmuel Aleph, chapter 18. Okay, I recommend you read it inside. We'll read parts of it. It's a very confusing section because what happens is after David fights Goliath, Shaul promised two things to David. He promised whoever beats Goliath, whoever kills him, will get money and will get a daughter of his as a wife. But then what happens? So David obviously kills Goliath, and then David wants to marry the Michal or Meirav. Sorry. So first, I'm just finding the psukim. He says, that's why I'm on the wrong page. Sorry, Shmuel Aleph, chapter 18. So, okay, so first he becomes, okay. So then he comes back, and then, right, first what happens is, the first thing that gets Shaul upset is that, I see you're writing in the chat about this, don't worry, we're going to have a whole question about Meirav and Michal and all that. That's the whole section of what we're going to learn now. But we start with, the women come out singing, and they say, and they put David in a much higher position than Shaul, and Shaul starts to get jealous of David. So the next thing that happens, well, there's a few things that happen, but the next thing for our purposes is Shaul says to David, Hine biti agdola Meirav, ota etein lecha lisha. You're going to have my oldest daughter Meirav. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Then, but he didn't really mean it. And then what happens is, Vihi be'et, a few psukim later, be'et hetet Meirav bat Shaul David, when it's time for him to give Meirav to David, Vihi ninala Adriela Macholati Lisha. She ends up marrying Adriela Macholati. Shaul gives her away. Okay, he wasn't really serious with David. He didn't really want to give her. The next pasuk, V'tehahav Michal bat Shaul David. Now the other daughter loves David. Vayishar davar be'enav, and Shaul says, this sounds good. And yes, it does sound like Rachel, I agree. This sounds good. And then he says, I'll do it. But then he says, you have to bring me. He then says, you have to bring me Mea or Lo Plishtim. And then when he brings in the Mea or Lo Plishtim, he fights against Plishtim. In other words, Shaul's hoping he's going to get killed and I'll never have to do it. And then he fights with the Plishtim. And then he comes with the Mea or Lo Plishtim. And then, I just want to find the pasuk, sorry. Right, Shaul realizes that God is with David and that Michal loves him. David. Okay, and fine. But then, fine, it doesn't say it here, but in the end, 1 second, I want to find that other pasuk. Sorry, I'm not organized today. Palti ben Laish. Then she ends up also marrying Palti ben Laish. Okay, here, that's why. It's in Shmuel Aleph Perek Kafei. Memdalet Shaul Natan et Michal Bito Eshet David LePalti ben Laish Asher Migilim. Okay, and she ends up with Palti ben Laish. And then there's these other psukim about Palti and ben Laish we'll get to at the end of class. So we'll leave that aside for right now. There's obviously some confusing things going on here. What's going on? So it starts with this big question that Shalu Talmidav Rabbi Yosi. how did he marry? The assumption is he betrothed Meirav, and then he was supposed to marry her, and that was the day that Shaul gave her off to somebody else. So how did he marry two sisters when they were still alive? And this is what I told you before. You can marry one sister as long as the other sister is dead. So Amar lahem Michal achar mitat Meirav nasa'ah. So that's Rabbi Yosi's answer. Meirav died, and only after that did he marry Michal. Okay, even though it seems like the whole thing with Michal happened soon after, but enough time passed, and Meirav died young. Okay. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha Amar, Omer, Kiddushay ta'ut hayu lo b'Meirav. Okay, now we're going to get halachic. It was a mistaken kiddushin. It wasn't a valid kiddushin. Okay, we're going to have to explain why. Shneimar tnat ishti Michal asher arasti li b'Meir or lo plishtim. That's the pasuk when David comes back after the war and says, "I want my wife Michal that you promised me." Why does he say et ishti et Michal? He said, why didn't he just say et Michal, like give me Michal? Why do you have to say my wife Michal? Well, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, we're going to see my Talmud. How does he learn it from here? Amarav Papa Michal ishti v'lo Meirav ishti. What David was saying is, give me Michal. I was never really betrothed to Meirav in the first place. It was a mistake. Now, how was it a mistake? Well, my kiddushay ta'ut dichtiv. So now we're going to figure out from the psukim. Again, it's not like the psukim really say this, but we're going to figure out from the psukim why it was kiddushay ta'ut dichtiv. I'll preface this by reminding you of a sugya we learned in Kiddushin. Two sugyas you're going to need to know. One is, if you betroth a woman if a man betroths a woman and says, instead of giving you money, I'm going to cancel a loan that you owe me, and with that money you'll be betrothed, you can't do that because it's not actual money. It was given to be used, and that's not actually there. The second thing is, what if you betroth a woman with a milveh and a pruta? You say, I'm going to betroth you by canceling a loan and giving you something small in addition. That's worth a pruta. So do we say that you're thinking of only the pruta and not the milveh? Or you're also thinking of the milveh, and if you're thinking of the milveh, well, then it's no good. So if you're thinking only of the pruta and you just happen to mention also I'll cancel the loan, but you don't really think the betrothal's on that because it's not effective, then it would work. If you think that, right, some people think milveh pruta dato a milveh, and then there's no kiddushin, okay? Because the milveh is worth a lot more than the pruta. So, okay, so those are the two things you need to know before we start this. So now we're going to say the following. Now, what's the kiddushay ta'ut? Because it says, Shaul promised, I'll give you a lot of money if you kill Goliath, and I'll give you my daughter. So Azal Kadle, he killed Goliath. Amar le milveh itlach gabai. V'makadesh b'milveh ena mekudeshet. So he said, listen, the money of betrothal will be, I'll cancel all the money that you owe me, Shaul. You promised you give me Osher Gadol. Okay, I won't take it. And instead, with that money, I'll betroth your daughter. And Kadesh B'milveh and Mekudeshet. And that's why she wasn't Mekudeshet. And that's why Azal Yaveh la Adriel. And that's why she ends up going to Adriel. Tichtiv Vayi be'etet Meirav bat Shaul David. Right? And then it says, and then read you that pasuk, she gets married to Adriel. Amar lei. So what then happened? That's really what it says in the section, right? You want Michal, so go bring me 100 orlei plishtim, right? That's the orla from that's the part you cut off at the Brit Milah, right? From the bring me 100 of those. Basically meaning go out and fight the plishtim and bring me back. And Azal Aitele, he didn't write the foreskins. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word. Bring back the foreskins of the plishtim. So he went and he brought it, which Shaul never thought he was going to do. Amarle, now, he wants to betroth them with the orlot, right, with the foreskins. So Amarle, milva pruta ilach gabai. So now this turns into a milva pruta, because remember, Shaul still owed him the money from Goliath. So he's going to, right, so now the betrothal is with, I'll cancel the loan, and here are the foreskins, which is giving him something actually physical. So two ways to understand what went on here. In other words, again, Shaul ends up giving her to Palti ben Laish. So he thinks the Kiddushin aren't good, but David thought he was married to Michal and thought the Kiddushin was good. So Shaul savar milvu pruta date milve. David savar milvu pruta date pruta. They were having a machloket. Machloket between is milve pruta. Do we think you're talking about the milve? And then that's what Shaul thought, and it's no good because it was still canceling the loan. Or David thought, no, milva v'pruta, you're thinking about the pruta. I was thinking about the foreskins. That's what I was giving you. That's one way to explain it. Some people explain it to kule alma milva pruta data pruta, that you could say they both thought. You really think of the pruta. The question is this a pruta? Shaul savar lo chaz v'lomidi. Said these orlot of the plishtim, foreskins, what are foreskins worth? They're worth nothing. What anyone can do with foreskins? They're not even worth a pruta. And that's why he thought the kiddushin wasn't valid. The David savar chazul l'kalba v'shunre. You could give it to dogs and cats to eat. So they're worth something. Okay. That's all Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who said it was kiddushay ta'ut with Meirav, and then there was a machloket between Shaul and David about whether it was a valid kiddushin or not with the orlot. Now we get to Rabbi Yosi, back to him. So the whole explanation started with that Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha darshan this pasuk, T'nat Ishtiet Michal Asher Arasi. She's the one that I betrothed. The first one really wasn't a good betrothal. But according to Rabbi Yosi, tonight Ishtiet Michal my darshebe. What does he do with this? So Rabbi Yosi l'tamei detanya Rabbi Yosi yad doresh mikraot mu'uravin. Okay, he explains mixed psukim. We're going to see what this means. K'tiv vayikach hamelech et shnei bnei ritzpa bat ayah sheyoda l'shaul et armoni et mefiboshet ve'chamesh bnei Michal sheyoda la'adriel ha'macholati. Okay, the focus of this pasuk, we're going to focus on the part is at the end. It says, notice, the 5 sons of Michal, Asher Yalda, that she gave birth to with Adriel HaMacholati. Now, you might be confused. Meirav, Michal, their names sound similar. Meirav is married to Adriel, not Michal. So why does it say the sons of Michal that were from Adriel? V'chila Adriel nitana? Hello, Palti ben Laish nitana. She ends up marrying Palti ben Laish, not Adriel HaMacholati. Dichtiv, Shaul Natan, and then we quote this pasuk about Palti ben Laish. Shaul Natan et Michal bito eshet David lePalti ben Laish. He gives, right? She was betrothed to David, but he gives her to Palti ben Laish. So why is it? So what they mean by Mikro Muravin, there's much more here than what you see. Ela makish kiddushay merav la'adriel lekiddushay Michal lepalti. Ma kiddushay Michal lepalti ba'avera, af kiddushay merav la'adriel ba'avera. What this pasuk is coming to say is Michal is to Adriel is like Michal is to Palti the way Merav is to Adriel. And it's to teach you that the kiddushin of both were valid and they were both married in sin to somebody else because they were already both betrothed to David, King David. So now, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha nami haktiva chamesha b'nei Michal bat Shaul. So what does Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha do with this? Remember, he doesn't think that the betrothal was good on Merav, so he wouldn't have that comparison. So what does he do with that pasuk? And from this, we're going to go off on a tangent. Amar lecha Rabbi Yeshua b'chi Michal yalada, hello Merav yalada. Merav yalda u'Michal gidla. Even according to Rabbi Yeshua, who didn't say she died before Michal married David, and that's why it was okay. But back to the Arayot thing, she did die young, and Michal took care of her children. Okay? Now, that wasn't his reason why he could have married 2 sisters, because she didn't die that young. But Michal ends up bringing up her children. Okay? And that's why they're her sons. This is to teach you anyone who raises an orphan in their house, it's as if they birthed them. And now we're going to have 5 psukim in the Tanakh that teach you this idea. Okay, there's reasons. Some people explain each one is a little bit of a different. You can think about it. We don't have time today, but you can give it some thought what the difference is between them. Okay, I'm not going to read the Siman. We're just going to start. Rabbi Chanina Omer Mehacha. Vatikrena lo hashchinot shem lemor yula ben leNaomi. Naomi yalada. Hello, Ruth yalda. When Ruth has a child, they say, Naomi has a son. It wasn't Naomi's son. Hello, Ruth yalda unama gidla. Naomi got gidla. Naomi raised the child. People say Boaz died before the child was born, and that Naomi raised. Lefichach nikral shma. That's like a semi-orphan, right? Because Ruth was still alive. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mehacha. V'ishto haYehudit yalda Yered Avigdol. Ele b'nei Bitya bat Paro shelakach lo Mered. Okay, who's Avigdor? That's Moshe. Bitya is this daughter of Paro, and Mered ze Kalev. V'lama nikashmo Mered shemara be'etzat meraglim. Okay, that's why he's called Mered. He went against the meraglim. But that's not the important part for our purposes. V'chi Bitya yalada. Hello, Yocheved yalada. Yocheved gave birth to Moshe, not Bitya. Why does she get the kavod? Ela Yocheved yalada. Bitya gidla. We all know that. Moshe grew up in her home. Right? Lefichach nikral shma. That's why he's called as if she's his mother. Rabbi Elazar Mar Mehacha, Ga'alta b'zroa amcha b'nei Yaakov Yosef Sela. You redeem the people, the sons of Jacob, the sons of Joseph. Now, all b'nei Israel are not the sons of Joseph. P'chi Yosef Yalad, hello, Yaakov Yalad. Ela Yaakov Yalad Yosef Kilkel. Apropos our parshiot here, right? That Yosef sustained everybody, so he gets for that. Lefichach nikru al shmo, right? He didn't bring them up, but he did give them food, which is kind of the thing that father does. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Rabbi Yonatan. Kol melameh ben chavero Torah. Here's another thing. Not just raising them, but even just teaching them Torah. Ma'aleh alav katuv ki'ilu yiladot. This is a very famous one. Shneimar ele todot Aharon u'Moshe. And then it starts to list the sons of Aaron. Uchtiv ele shmo b'nei Aaron. Lomar lecha Aaron yalad Moshe limed lefichach nikra shmo. Moshe was their teacher and therefore gets called as if he's their father. Lachen klamar Hashem al Beit Yaakov asher pada Avraham. So now they have, this is Beit Yaakov that was redeemed, that Yaakov redeemed Abraham. What? Yaakov redeemed Abraham? But this is just because we're talking about child rearing. So now they get off on a different thing, which is Amar Rav Yehuda shepda'o mitzar gidul banim. He saved him from tzar gidul banim. Okay, so right, Rashi says it's shutal alav Torah hashvatim. Okay, that basically Yaakov took the burden of all the tribes having 12 children. Okay, whereas Avram only had two, even though the two gave him a lot of trouble. But there's other explanations of this as well as to how Yaakov redeemed Abraham, but I'm going to leave that to you to look up commentaries here. And now, v'hainu dichtiv lo, and here's another source for that. Lo ata yevosh Yaakov, v'lo ata panav yechavaru. So why are there two, right? It's the same words, really. Same meaning. Why does it say it twice? Lo ata yevosh Yaakov me'aviv, v'lo ata panav yechavaru me'avi aviv. He will not be embarrassed from his father. He will not be embarrassed from his great-grandfather. Because he took the real burden upon him. Okay. Ktiv. Palti, Uktiv Paltiel. So who is this Palti ben Laish that she ends up marrying? Why does it call him sometimes Palti, sometimes Paltiel? Amar Rabbi Yochanan Palti Shmo, v'lamani kro Shmo Paltiel, shepalto el min avera. God saved him from sin. Because what happened with Paltiel? Well, he married someone who was already betrothed to somebody else. So how did God save him? Ma'asan na'atz cherev beino lebeina. He stuck a sword in the bed, in between the two of them, so that anytime he would try to get closer, he'd get killed. So basically that kept Palti away from her. Amar kolosek b'davar zeh yidaker b'cherev zeh. Anyone who gets involved will get stabbed by this sword. Baktiv. But wait, it says in the pasuk, and this is later, vayelchi ta'isha alochu b'cho achareha abba churayim, vayomer le'alav avner lechshu vayashov. Okay, this is in Shmuel Bet Perek Gimel. You can look there at the context and kind of the end of the section, which is he ends up her husband, Isha. He's called her husband. Now, he's not her husband if she was betrothed to somebody else. So na'asala kisha. Well, she was like his wife because she lived with him. V'haktiv halochu b'cho. It says he was crying. Why was he crying? If he wasn't really ever married to her, and you think he'd be happy to be done with this, sword in his bed every night. Well, a mitzvah da'azal mineh. It was a mitzvah that he had upon him to not succumb to the desire for her. Abachurayim, that's what the pasuk says, right? He cried Abachurayim, shenasu shnehem kebachurim shelo tamu tam biad. They were both like young lads. I mean, him and her, even though it's masculine, but that they never ended up having relations. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Tokfo shel Yosef ambanuto shel Boaz, Tokfo shel Boaz ambanuto shel Palti ben Laish. There's a bunch of different ways to understand this, but we'll explain it like this. The strength of Yosef, you think Yosef didn't succumb to Isha Potiphar? Well, that was nothing compared to Boaz, who came into his bed at night and he didn't do anything with her. And you think that was a lot? What about Palti ben Laish, who every night had to succumb, had to not succumb to his desires? Tokfo shel Yosef ambanuto shel Boaz. We'll just start this today and we'll finish this up on tomorrow's daf. Okay, what's this word vayilafet? It's a very strange word. This is the night when she comes into his bed with Boaz. Okay, his sexual organ became like a head of a turnip. Okay, basically the idea is he was very aroused by her and yet didn't do anything about it. And with that, on that lovely note, we end today's talk. So we're going to do a quick review. We started with the kohen gadol, and we talked about the yibum, why he can't do yibum, the aseh and the lo taseh and all that. And then we had and really that wasn't even that, right? Theoretically, he could do it, but it's exeras that for the second time. Then we talked about what happens in the avelim and the different opinions about that, how we understand min hamikdash lo yitzeh in different ways, and what the order of how people did the shura and the history about it, how it changed, and yet kind of either way is fine now. But we talked about a lot of the jealousy and those issues that came up. And then we had those stories of Mishum Maaseh Shaya, they changed things. And then from there, we got to another Maaseh Shaya, which was really the next section, which is about the king, Lo Dam V'Lo Danim Oto. And that was all because of this Yanai HaMelech story, at least according to the Bavli's version. And then we had Lo Choles V'Lo Chotzim, but yet, according to Rabbi Yudi, could do yibum. How could he do that? What happened to Nasish Machal Kvodo and Kvodo Machul? And then we got to the whole story of Mirav and Michal, and how did those stories, what exactly went on? Two different versions of the story. Did he really marry both of them? Did he marry neither? Right? not the first one, but the second one. But Shaul didn't think he was married to the second one, and was there a halachic thing going on here? So we saw the two different versions, and then we ended with this whole thing about bringing up other people's children. That, and then we talked about Palti ben Laish and how he, was this almost non-known character gets put on a pedestal higher than Boaz and Yosef, according at least to some of the interpretation. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and a good week.